They did a CT scan of my head.
Yeah.
And everything seemed to be fine. And he called back a couple weeks later, and he was like, it seems like it could be no big deal, but she has some vascular lesions on her brain, which, for those who don't
what's
know,
a vascular lesion?
I'm going to describe it poorly, but essentially it's like a little soft spot in your brain. It's been damaged one way or another, whether through concussions, maybe you've had a mini stroke, maybe it's a little mushy spot in your brain.
Whoa.
It doesn't affect you as much as it sounds like it would.
Yeah.
Like.
But it's something to be
right.
cautious
He
of.
was like, she's 12. It seems weird that even as like a child that's involved in sports, she would have a couple vascular lesions on her brain. So he was like, I'm gonna forward this to Froedtert or Children's Hospital of Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to send her in for an MRI scan. We're just going to look into this a little bit more, and hopefully it'll be nothing.
Yeah.
So I lived the next couple weeks, and the last for the time being of my life in normalcy. And then on Christmas Eve, actually.
Wow.
So I went and got my MRI done at Children's, around here, actually. And on Christmas Eve, we got the call. And they were like, hey, sorry to do this on Christmas Eve, but it literally cannot wait. Your daughter has a very aggressive form of a super rare disease called Moyamoya. Moyamoya. And they were like, essentially what that means is that we need to get her in for brain surgery ASAP within the next month.
Jesus, and you're 12.
Yeah, and these are neurosurgeons. All doctors are
Yeah.
going to be busy, but neurosurgeons, for them to be like, we need you in here in a
ASAP.
month.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, that's crazy. Okay.
Yeah. And
right.
Okay, keep going, because
No, go ahead.
I'm just curious. So, like, are you? Because you said obviously like the headache didn't go away, and it was difficult for you to sleep at this time, right? And you're taking this drug that maybe you shouldn't have to be taking as a 12-year-old. What is like the day to day? Do you feel like a immense amount of pain, or do you just feel mostly normal with like a little bit of a weirdness in the head?
I was exhibiting some odd symptoms at the time that nobody really looked too deep into. Like very, very recently in this timeline when I was 12, I had a slight lisp for a moment. And no one really looked into that.
And you didn't have one prior to?
Not really. I've always been a fast talker. And then when I was in middle school, like my teeth were still kind of big and whatever.
Okay.
So it wasn't something that people really looked into. It wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't really noticeable at all.
Yeah.
It wasn't noticeable until a doctor pointed it out to us.
Yeah.
But I had like this crazy brain fog, and I'm trying to remember in chronological order like how these symptoms displayed, but around that time, like I was starting to kind of lose my appetite, and I wasn't sleeping very well, which wasn't super surprising. My mother has the worst insomnia of anyone you'll ever meet, so it was, I was like, okay, so I have trouble sleeping too, whatever.
Yeah, okay.
But mainly it was like this huge pressure in my brain, especially like behind my eyes. And I would just have this horrible brain fog. I would get these terrible migraines with like the aura and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I would get dizzy. Sometimes I would just super weird.
Yeah, just kind of thrown out. So
right.
So you did feel. So it was. Yeah. You did feel off.
Super sensitive to lights and noise and but those are all also signs of a concussion. Yeah. So who's really looking into that? Yeah. But yeah.
So you get diagnosed, and what was the name of it again?
Moyamoya.
Moyamoya. You get diagnosed with. What is that for us that don't know?
Moyamoya. It is not a Japanese disease, but it was found fairly recently in the 80s by Japanese doctors. So Moyamoya essentially translates to a puff of smoke, which is what my MRI looks like. The arteries in my head, they slowly get thinner and thinner until they close off completely. So when you look at an MRI scan of someone with Moyamoya, it literally looks like smoke in the brain, because they close off until they and
so then so you can't get any
blood to your brain.
No blood to your wow.
Yeah, stroke is like the highest risk for people with Moyamoya. That is like the main risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So, that's what Moyamoya is.
So you get diagnosed, and so do you know right away, like, how do you find out? Are the doctors telling you directly? Because you're still a kid. They're telling your parents. We got a call
on Christmas Eve. I was with my dad because he has his Christmas Eve parties, or Christmas parties on Eve.
Okay.
So we were literally about to walk out the door, and then my stepmom got a call from my mom, and that's, I mean, I don't want to say it. At that time in my life, my parents didn't really get along well, so I was like, that's weird. Why is my mom calling my stepmom? You know,
something's going down.
Right. So I hear them talking in the other room in the kitchen, and my bedroom is right next to the kitchen. I'm just getting ready. I'm trying not to be nosy, and then my stepmom's like, "Hey, Car, can you like come out here?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Did somebody die?" Like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Little did I know.
Jeez, little did you know it was fucking.
It was me. It was me. Yeah.
What did she tell you? Did she tell you right away? Like,
yeah, they told me right away, because I would have to, after like the holidays, pretty much. I had to be shipped off to the hospital, get prepared for surgery.
So what is that like as a 12-year-old going from? I mean, your Christmas is like, as a 12-year-old or anybody before you're fucking, 13, 14 years old, it's the best time of the year. It's still the best time of the year for a lot of people, right? It's like you're in heaven, basically. You get some gifts, you get to hang out with your family, whatever. You go from that to now you're having to deal with this at 12. What is that next month of getting prepped like? What is that?
Well, I'm gonna tell you this. I didn't even fully process everything until like well after I had my surgeries.
Yeah.
The whole time I was in the hospital, and there would be a little bit more that we can get into about that.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't bother me. A lot of the doctors were very like, when you have any 12-year-old that's coming in for some intense surgery, some life-threatening surgery, obviously you'd expect them to be pretty scared and pretty upset. But I was already one of those kids that was like, oh, you're so mature for your age. Like, I was just going through the motions without really even thinking about it.
So do you think you were maybe like kind of maybe putting down whatever emotions, or do you think you generally had a more positive outlook, or were you?
I didn't. It really wasn't either or.
It was
kind of just immediate adapt.
Got you.
Like immediately I adapted. This is going to be my life now for however long. And it is what it is. Whatever. So that was.
So when do you get your first surgery? A month later?
Yes.
Or a
so
month-ish?
It was actually about a month and a half. It was. Let's see. Can I recall the exact date? February 16th.
Okay.
Something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, not very long after you get the call, you're going in for surgery.
Yeah.
And what are they doing? What are they hoping to accomplish with the surgery to help this disease? Because this is this like a disease that everybody has to get a surgery then to stop, or is it on different stages?
It depends. So Moyamoya is one of those diseases that, because it was found so recently, there's not a whole lot that's really known about it. It's also extremely rare. I think now this will differ depending on the source you look at, but I think around 200 to 500 people get diagnosed every year, which is
very rare,
an incredibly low amount.
Yeah.
Right.
Holy shit.
And it's often found in really young children and people over 50. So I wasn't really in their demographic to be looking for that. So it's a miracle that they did.
You're like about to be
right. And I hadn't showed any issues around it so far. But that's also why it was so aggressive.
Wow.
My doctor actually told me in the consulting meeting before I had my brain surgery, we meet the neurologist and everything. He told me if we hadn't found this, say, in 3 months, you probably would have died from a stroke.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, so it was a very time-sensitive thing.
Yeah. Well, so what happens then after you get the first surgery done? Because I'm sure there was probably things that mentioned that you had kind of been dealing with medical stuff since then for quite a while. What was going on after that?
Backtrack real quick to your first question, what the surgeries are.
Yes, let's do that.
The first surgeries I had, they did one on both sides of my head a month apart. So my next surgery would be a month later.
Mm-hmm.
And they're called an indirect bypass, which essentially means most people have this vein right here center in your head, kind of runs along your temple. You can either have a donor or you can just use your own. I used my own. But what they did was they removed this artery and moved it and stitched it to my brain to encourage new artery growth.
What?
Yeah.
So they're taking... So the little vein that pops up when I'm fucking stressed the fuck out,
that vein right there.
Raging,
it's
they
in
take
my
that
brain
one
now.
and they just put it up there.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
And they sew it, stitch it to your brain.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So they had to do two back to back, basically a month apart or whatever, right? So
yeah.
In between surgeries, because you said like you were kind of going through the motions, right? You kind of almost took it as like a kid when you graduate, grade school and you go to high school, like you're just like, oh, this is my new normal now, like this, I just go to this school now. Like it's not like a super big different thing.
It wasn't. See, but that's the thing, is it was a huge thing.
It is
to
huge.
our small middle school. So especially living in a small town, and I was a very well-liked student, a little bit of a teacher's pet. I was always smart. I had fun at school. I enjoyed it. So I think it was a huge shock for a lot of the staff as well, because, when you have a chronically ill child, now you have to meet with the school staff and make sure that I have full access to things like bathrooms and the nurse's office and food whenever I want. And, teachers need to be aware of the signs of strokes and seizures and, stuff like that. So it was this big meeting where we basically had to break it to my 7th grade teachers, like, hey, I'm not going to be here much this school year. I'm pretty sick, stuff like that. Set up a 504 plan.
What's a 504 plan?
That's a plan in middle schools that basically outlines that this student has access to these amenities.
Okay.
And so mine specifically were I had access to the bathrooms whenever. I could drink water in any class whenever.
Yeah. Which, at first, I think both those things kids should be able to do whenever they want to.
Yeah.
I mean, for them within reason.
Right,
of
right.
course.
Like, don't spend like 10 hours in there.
Yeah. But I do think it's kind of ridiculous.
If you gotta go, you gotta go, man.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys come up with this plan together. Then it's like, okay, we need to make sure we're accommodating
so that I can still do well in school, because that was the ultimate goal. Is like we're gonna, and as it got worse, particularly in 8th grade. 8th grade was probably the worst year for my health, right in between 7th and 9th when it started and ended. That 504 plan was a bit different because, like I mentioned before the podcast started, I spent like an accumulative 2 months in 8th grade, give or take.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
And it was like a 3-year, but this was over 3 years total of like constantly checking on things and going back. So after you got these first 2 surgeries and they deal with taking this guy and putting him up here, what is like the next? Are they thinking like, okay, we should be good now, or are they telling you like what's the plan after that?
So they were very hopeful. They were like, yeah, your case is very aggressive, but you're young. Young people heal much faster. So they were like, hopefully this artery growth will really take. We did both sides, and other than what you're experiencing right now with the headaches and the pain, you're relatively healthy in every other aspect. So, just keep trying to go to school. If you have a headache, just like general, just take care of yourself, and then we're going to check up again in 6 months. I was still going to doctor's appointments maybe every couple weeks until I had my final MRI that would show if there was new growth or not.
Yeah.
So I was still there all the time, constantly getting different stuff done. During that time, we also found out I have fibromuscular dysplasia, which is not nearly as big of a deal as.
What is that, though? I don't know what that is.
So FMD affects the arteries, mainly the carotid arteries in your neck and your renal arteries in your kidneys. And what that essentially means is your artery, instead of being straight like a tube, it's beaded like a string of pearls. So the muscle gets thicker in some areas.
So it's almost like ribbed. It's like
it looks like a string of pearls. I've seen mine on a scan, and obviously that causes issue with blood flow.
Yeah.
So
holy cow.
I didn't have a bad case of FMD.
What does that do normally? Like, what is like the I guess effects that you're gonna feel of that then?
So actually,
is it like harder to do physical activity? Is it harder on where is it?
No, I wouldn't say FMD really hasn't affected my life at all. It's just because it's actually really common. About 5% of the population has it, and like 3% of that, they don't even know it. They just live their lives.
Really?
Yeah. So some cases are worse than others, as with anything.
Yeah.
But I had it in my carotid, and I believe my kidneys. I believe so. I have duplex renal output in my kidneys too, which basically means nothing. I have 2 chambers in each kidney.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
As opposed to how many do we normally have?
1 in each kidney.
Wow, I'm learning.
Yeah, duplex renal output.
So I imagine, as I'm now being thrown all these facts at me, I'm feeling like you've learned quite a lot about all this, having to, maneuver through this on your own.
Well, I definitely think there's something to be said about, especially during such formative years of your life, like 12, 13, 14, when you're doing so much growing just as a person. Instead of being with my peers and my friends, I spent so much time with family and around doctors, medical professionals. You
picked up a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching that last video. Click right over here to see that episode in its entirety. click over here if you want to subscribe and see more videos and other cool shit that we put out on this channel. Do it.